We are a spiral. We are a spiral. We are a spiral coming home. We are a spiral. We are a spiral. We are a spiral coming home. Earth we are, and earth we will be. Earth we are, and earth we will be. We are a spiral. We are a spiral. We are a spiral coming home. We are a spiral. We are a spiral. We are a spiral coming home.
Thank you so much, Taya, for that wonderful introduction to our event today. And let me be the first to welcome everyone that is joining us here on Zoom, those that are watching later, and those that are participating in other ways. I'm Dr. Sam Pourfazane. I'm the director of the Center for Multi-Religious Studies at Star King School for the Ministry, and I'm so delighted and pleased to welcome Rabbi Lynn here as our esteemed speaker today in communication with Taya Mashir and myself. Just going to introduce us with a bit of information about the Center for Multireligious Studies, which is a premier hub for the academic and vocational exploration of multireligious identity and practice. We founded the Center for Multireligious Studies in 2021, which and as part of the legacy of Dr. Ibrahim Farajajeh, our beloved former provost, and explores the idea that religious identity and practice can be non-binary in nature, that there is a multiplicity not only within ourselves in the way that we practice, but also in concert with others. We like to think of ourselves as a place where all are welcome and where we are in joint practice in the path of peace. We support a number of different things as an institution. One of them is a diverse array of religious and spiritual traditions in terms of our coursework. We offer certificates in multi-religious studies and psychedelic justice and companioning. We also do multi-religious chaplaincy training in coordination with Stark King's chaplaincy concentration. We sponsor sessions within Stark King's annual symposium and other public programs such as this one. And we also most recently have initiated a digital publication called The Tapestry, which is a repository of multi-religious articles, media, curricula, and educational materials. You can find that on the Star King website at sksm.edu/cmrs. Now, one of our public programs that began last year is called the House of Dates, and it's an ongoing series presented by the Center at Star King and co-sponsored by the Sarah and Hajar series in partnership with Muslim and Jewish voices from diverse backgrounds and histories. The series, House of Dates, offers opportunities for deep learning, multi-religious worship, and chaplaincy training, demonstrating a commitment by Jews, Muslims, and allies to counter Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and advocate for peace and justice in Palestine and Israel. So today's event is called Transformational Solidarity, Building the Movement for a Loving World. And I'll pass it off to my partner and compatriot, Taya Mashir, to introduce our esteemed speaker.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sam, and thank you so much to all who are tuning in here in the House of Dates. Also, we welcome the folks who are joining us through From the Deep's Days of Attunement, which is a co-sponsor of today's event and which is a choose your own adventure journey of sacred conversations, reflections, and invitations to immerse in liberatory devotion. And it is such a joy to welcome someone who has been an amazing teacher, colleague, and friend of mine for many years. It's just such a gift to be amidst this journey with Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb. Rabbi Lynn Gottlieb offers radical rabbinical leadership, art, and storytelling for a more just world. She is in her 50th year as a rabbi and was one of the first women to become a rabbi in Jewish history. She's a human rights activist, a pathfinding Jewish feminist, artist, educator, and storyteller. And Rabbi Lynn engages in multi faith, intergenerational, and multicultural organizing in solidarity with racial, indigenous, gender justice, and Palestinian liberation struggles. Rabbi Lynn sits on the Rabbinic Council of Jewish Voice for Peace and is board chair of Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity. Rabbi Lynn's books include Peace Primer 2, She Who Dwells Within, A Feminist Vision of Renewed Judaism, and The Trail Guide to the Torah of Nonviolence. All of them such amazing books. You can find more about her work at rabbilyngottlieb.com. Rabbi Lynn, it is such a gift to be here with you today in conversation around transformational solidarity. And I'm wondering if you will open us with prayer and song.
Greetings, everyone. Blessings of peace upon us. This is a poem by Refat al-Arir, who, after writing it, was killed or martyred. He is a founder of We Are Not Numbers and was a teacher to many people and in the craft of writing. He wrote, "If I must die, you must live to tell my story, to sell my things, to buy a piece of cloth and some string, make it white with a long tail, so that a child somewhere in Gaza, while looking heaven in the eye, awaiting his dad who left in a blaze and bid no one farewell, not even to his flesh, not even to himself, sees the kite, my kite you made, flying above and thinks for a moment an angel is there, bringing back love. If I must die, let it bring hope. Let it be a story." These are very challenging times. We are watching a genocide unfold. We are watching the machines of war take hold. And even though so many people are doing everything they can to be advocates for peace, whether it's through positive relationship building and movement building, by opposing, by demanding an arms embargo, or creating student encampments, many of us feel that we have not yet been able to turn the tide. And we feel perhaps isolated, alone, numb, enraged, feverish to keep acting. And in this state, I try to remember the words of Cornel West, who said, "Be the hope that you seek." We are not the first generation to be the hope. And I am thinking of an ancestor, a Jewish ancestor named Moshe ibn Ezra. Moshe ibn Ezra, who lived from 1055 to 1138 in Granada. And he was a master poet in Hebrew and in Arabic, and his work is well known. He especially wrote liturgies of atonement, or creating a culture of repair. He believed in healing, as does Jewish tradition. And the song he wrote is called El Nora Alila Hamtsilanu Mehila Bishat Haneila. The mysterious one of the cosmos, as we pray for peace, please grant us healing in this hour where we rise up to perform the sacred act of tshuva, of creating a culture of repair. And the song is like this. And please forgive my voice. I know I'm not doing it justice. El Nora Alila, El Nora Alila, Hamtsilanu Mechila, Bishat HaTshuva. El Nora Alila, El Nora Alila, Hamtsilanu Mechila, Bishat HaTshuva. The call to repair acknowledges that harm has been done. There is the work of prevention and creating a culture of love, which we pray and act in the hopes that our religious communities can create sanctuaries for that work and let that resonance be felt. And we see what is happening in the world, and we know that we are called to not only prevent harm, but face the harm that's being done, and to try to build a movement that dismantles harm and creates a loving world, a world. And in the work of my own practice, which is called, I am a Shomeret Shalom. I practice the Torah of nonviolence, and I come from a legacy of people who have practiced nonviolence, including my own teacher, Rabbi Everett Gendler, Alav Shalom, who was a close friend of Martin Luther King and is the person that coaxed and convinced Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel to join him to walk across the bridge in Selma. This would have been the third walk, and the one in which there's a famous picture of him walking across the bridge. Everett walked the path of nonviolence, and he was a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation. Among his friends and teachers and colleagues was Reverend James Lawson, Alav Shalom, who recently passed, and himself traveled to India to see if he could discover and learn the strategies of nonviolent transformation which Gandhi developed in the face of the British Empire in seeking freedom. Reverend James was someone who organized for freedom, and with the freedom movement that happened in the United States and the Black community, other freedom movements were inspired. And there started to be intersectionality among people of faith, faith-rooted people, to work together in a transformative way to dismantle systemic harm. This is my lineage. My teacher, Everett, ordained me. I learned from Reverend James. And even before I really understood myself as someone who was going to practice nonviolence, I understood that in order to build a movement, to follow a path of justice, one needed to experience the front line of harm. And those front lines exist in many, many places. They exist in gender. They exist in the outcomes of racism and misogyny. They exist in the outcomes of anti-Semitism. And I came to learn they exist as well in the formulation of Zionism as a response, as one response to the violence of the Holocaust. And I learned this by traveling as a young person when I was 17 to Eretz Yisrael. And I immediately saw that the story that I was given, a land without a people and a people without a land, was somewhat of a distortion because there were Palestinians living there, and no one seemed to want to talk about them in any coherent way. And because I grew up in the theater and learned the power of storytelling, which was a window to so many different cultures. I grew up with someone who was a puppeteer and who trained me in the art of storytelling. I went to seek out a Palestinian that could tell me what is the story of life for Palestinians living in Israel. I'm telling you this because part of movement building for a loving world means crossing boundaries, bars, walls, and borders that the world tells you don't cross them because it's dangerous over there. I never let that deter me. And so I ended up at the age of 17 sitting, wearing so inappropriately dressed, like the most inappropriately dressed you could possibly imagine, for sitting in the home of a Palestinian man with short sleeves and short shorts and an Israeli hat called a kova tembel, which literally means a fool's hat. And it is like a bucket hat that that Israeli, so-called Israeli pioneers, that's what they call themselves, wore in the fields. And it was part of the Zionist identity of people returning to the land and cultivating a forgotten and barren land. Well, I asked Atala Mansour the question, what is it like to be an Israeli Arab? Excuse my language. That's the only language I had at that time. And he proceeded to say, after I took out my yellow pad and my paper and told him I was writing for a teen journal, which was true, and that I was also, an aspiring journalist. He was just shaking his head and just, he said, I will tell you my story, but you have to be promised to be accountable for this story, because this story will change your life. This story will cause you to look at history differently than you have been taught. And it felt very much like I was signing a different kind of covenant, and that was the covenant of transformational solidarity. I said, I agree, and started writing, and he unfolded the story of the Nakba, the catastrophe of 1948. And that kind of accountability led me to continue to go back again and again and again, 20 times, leading delegations and trying to understand what my role could be as a peacemaker, or as someone who wants to know a broader story, a bigger truth, who wants to be involved in repairing the world. That path, along with a path of feminism, indigenous solidarity, anti-racism work, all these different paths come together. That is what one finds out. And as they come together, in my case, there's certain lessons that I learned around building a movement for a loving world, is my own positionality. Everybody has a positionality, and it's always complex. It's not just one thing. But in the many-petaled being that I am, I learned to understand my positionality in my class, in racialized definitions, historical context, all of these different things, national identity. I am sixth generation Turtle Island Ashkenazi Jew. So all of these different pieces were part of a learning path that came from being open to intersectionality and being open to forging networks with people struggling to end systemic violence, who are struggling on the front line. And one thing this is my 52nd year. I'm entering my 52nd year as a rabbi, and in this unusual position for me, I guess, one thing I've learned is that beloved community comes out of this kind of work. That intersectionality is the field of, it's the ground where people can build beloved community. And following this path, when I moved to California, following my son, who is a public defender here in Northern California, I looked around to see where I would land and who to organize with. And I called up Reverend Phil Lawson, brother of Reverend James, who's also been a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation from the age of, I believe, 19. And he said, well, come meet me at Lamy College, because there's a protest on the rising cost of housing for students. And so that, so I went there, and there I met my very dear colleague, Reverend Deborah Lee. And discovered the amazing work that she was doing, and interfaith movement for human integrity was just starting to form. And I immediately got involved. They asked me to be on the board. And in this context, this is an organization that is run by people of color and has as one of its main values the idea that we have to center the wisdom and tactics of people who are directly impacted and figure out ways to be in solidarity with each other as we build a movement, as we build our power. And that principle has allowed us to do amazing work and to have actual victories in the state of California, like closing down detention centers, developing and supporting emergent leadership from people who have been incarcerated or people who are under the threat of detention. We have seen this methodology work. It has meant for us continual training. And I happened to be last October 7th, I happened to be at a board and staff retreat at Interfaith Movement for Human Integrity in the woods. And we were, myself and Deborah and Marambata, a Palestinian woman, originally from Jerusalem. We were in a tiny, tiny Quaker bunk room, and Deborah was on the top bunk. I'm on the bottom, and Maram was across the way. Deborah came down the bunk stairs, sat on my bed, and opened her computer. Maram sat up in bed, and I realized that something terrible had happened. And at that point, all of us knew that something horrible was going to unfold. We could see it coming. And that is also the burden of doing this work, is understanding the devastating impact of militarism and violence, systemic violence. And very often we live in times where we kind of try to put it aside, because who wants to live in that modality, on a daily basis if we don't have to? And most of our lives are busy and full and, the things that we're doing. But very often in this work, you can see a trend that's coming, and that if there's not intervention, the most acute form of the violence will unfold. And that is what we're seeing right now for all kinds of reasons. And this is where being part of movement building means that together we can not only withstand what's coming our way, but we can create sanctuaries for life, and we can build the power of nonviolent resistance based on the wisdom of the past, what we learned from the past, especially the past 150 years, when movement building it's kind of new in a certain way, this multi-faith, multicultural movement building that came out of resistance to colonialism and Gandhian techniques, which was part of that resistance, to this moment when we are facing a digital world we cannot yet imagine. We are facing increasing militarization of our lives. Possibly we are facing fascism in the United States in a more acute form in this time. And therefore, movement building for a loving world really fulfills the first commandment, if you like, or the first protocol of all of our traditions. Every life is a universe. If you save one life, you save an entire world. And for me, the way that I think about that perhaps goes to a story early on in 1998 when I was leading a delegation to Palestine with the Fellowship of Reconciliation. And we were sitting in a tent nearby a house that had been destroyed by Israel. And this family of 12 was homeless and they were living in a tent. And we came with, food. They were cooking, but we were helping, and we were there to hear the mom's story. And her youngest child saw my face and burst into tears. And I realized what that meant. I've been a teacher of children my whole life. My first job was as a puppeteer at birthday parties. My mother was a puppeteer. I have always been involved in intergenerational programming through ceremony and arts and music and dance and storytelling. And so to see the ravages of violence upon the lives of children is unbearable. And that is why we are obligated to be part of building a movement for a loving world and to do a lot of soul tending and healing, to draw on the beautiful artifacts and living properties of our cultures and spiritual traditions that can strengthen us, to take responsibility and to weed out the things that we may be unconsciously passing on that are not positive for building a loving world, to learn the traditions and to tend the legacies of peacemaking from each other and what it really means to do that on the front lines, and to build a movement for a loving world. And one of the most powerful modalities ritually that is a multi-faith, has become for many of us a multi-faith ritual that transforms leadership, transforms narrative, and builds power, is the art of pilgrimage. And I learned the art of pilgrimage to sites of wounding. You pilgrimage to where harm happened. And along the way, you may end up in incredibly beautiful places, but the main pilgrimage is to, whether it's to the site of the Los Alamos, or the Trinity site in New Mexico, or following the footsteps of the atomic bomb as part of the atomic mirror pilgrimage, or going to Palestine and visiting the massacre sites, which I have done. The places, there's so many massacre sites. Whatever we're giving witness to, or going to San Francisco and walking from place to place where people of color were shot and killed in the street. These kind of pilgrimages make lamentations a kind of protest, a cry, and it's a witness to what happened, and it allows the truth of the harms to be heard, and it also carries a demand of change and testimony from people who are working for change. And sometimes those folks are people themselves who have been wounded by the system, most often. Pilgrimage is a wonderful methodology, tactic, and we think of ourselves as tying a web, pilgrimages are part of those pathways, those neural pathways that light up our capacity to build a loving world.
Oh my goodness, Rabbi Lynn, I'm just incredibly moved by all of what you've shared. And I have questions for you, and we welcome also questions from folks who are tuning in. Feel welcome to place those in the chat. I have at least a few as I've been taking notes on the principles that you're naming. I want to begin with a question. You name that transformational solidarity asks us to cross boundaries, walls, and borders. The world tells you don't cross them because it's dangerous over there. What gives you courage to cross those boundaries, or what invitation might you offer to folks who are on an edge? And I'll say I'll offer a personal example here of something that I learned from you. You were many decades ago the first Jewish voice in leadership I encountered who is unequivocally speaking in solidarity with Palestinian liberation. And I it was my first time learning that that was even possible for a Jewish person to be vocal in that way. And I saw the impacts that that had institutionally. And what I see is that being willing to cross borders means that certain relationships build and others drop away. And I see in this time over this year many people wrestling with what that means to make certain alliances and let go of ones perhaps that have um, been previously. I'm wondering if you'll speak to these themes.
Yes, that's true. That would be what John Lewis calls good trouble, you know. It's true. This kind of a path has really well, there's a couple things. One is I imagine a golden thread between me and every person. Like, I don't want to lose a vision of humanity of other people. I don't want to be engaging in similar kinds of behavior. So that's one piece. So that requires cultivating a lot of listening, deep listening, and so I can really hear what another person is saying. That's a little different in my mind than confronting an institution. And very often people get confused about our personal relationships and the way institutions guard, and they're gatekeepers of certain points of view. So you're going to get in trouble. I mean, so therefore I learned also that storytelling, there's certain ways of bringing a story forward to some communities that might make them more open. When I first started the work of Palestinian solidarity, very early on in the 80s, I guess, I created a character called Tahrir, Mother Freedom. And since Palestinians were not invited into Jewish spaces, I'm a good storyteller, and was known and kept getting invited to tell stories. I decided my last character in a piece called Mother, Women on the Edge. That's what it's called, Women on the Edge. Would be Tahrir, and she'd come in, that me, and sit on a piece of rubble. This is in the 80s, right? She's sitting on a piece of rubble, and she puts on her kufiya, her hijab, and tells a story of the death of her 3 daughters. And the last image is she's standing and doing a kind of Debka step and saying, I will survive. You can do this to me and this to me and this to me, but I will survive. I found that when I performed that in a woman's audience, which happened in those days, with especially in the beginning of Jewish feminism, there was an immediate understanding of the humanity of that character. When I performed it with men and women, especially when men rabbis were present, immediately it would become a political conversation, and people would yell at me and all this kind of stuff. And in that context, I learned to understand the process of denial. I have my own scheme of when people speak to me, I have my own scheme of saying, okay, this is where you are. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. 5 is like, nothing's matter, everything's fine, don't ruffle, you don't do that because everything's just fine. That, of course, comes from the privilege, those who hold privilege in a violent context. Then the next level, still pretty much in that 5, is it's all their fault. Everything is their fault. So looking at October 7th, which was a war crime against innocent civilians, that the language then becomes, you cannot negotiate with Hamas, and every Palestinian is Hamas, and it's all their fault, and they hate Jews, and they want to throw them into the sea, and it becomes part of this massive way of looking at Palestinian reality in Gaza, and being able to criminalize and demonize the entire experience so that one feels justified in the harm one is doing. In that context, it is hard to figure out, where is the invitation to move a little off of that. And sometimes for me, that has been telling the stories of children like Hind. And when you read the biblical text, Pharaoh hardened his heart. You can feel it from people. Their hearts are hardened, and they're not going to open them for you, which is why we have to build our power to change a system, and also to find where our allies are, people who believe in international law and human rights, and nothing justifies atrocity. And in that regard, I am a Shomeret Shalom. I follow the Torah of nonviolence. I believe, and I can speak to this with people, this is my choice. I'm not saying how anyone else should struggle, but I believe that Jewish tradition is a nonviolent tradition from the rabbinic period onward, that you can read again and again in text after text that anyone who even lifts their hand against another is considered an evil person. So I believe in building a movement for a loving world means taking stock of one's own tradition and obviously there are different people carry different things. So we really need to be very clear on our values. Which values are we prioritizing that will motivate our actions? Do we believe that safety comes from killing the other side? It didn't work on us. It doesn't work. It's a horrible idea. It's an abomination, really. And therefore, we have to help people clarify their values and give them hope, a vision that there is another way. Sometimes when people are making the Holocaust comparison, I'll tell stories of the American Friends Service Committee or the wives who in Rosenstrasse Street or the village of Le Chambon that saved 5,000 Jews. It is possible to act in ways that promote peace over war. And then we lose relationships over this. That's especially institutional relationships. Yeah.
Thank you so much for what you're sharing here. You spoke of the importance in transformational solidarity of centering the wisdom and tactics of people who are directly impacted. Can you speak more about that practice?
It it is a practice of deep listening. Nobody has all the answers, right? But certainly if you're going into an unfamiliar environment, like say you're going into an area of the woods or desert or which you've never been before, you need someone to help guide you. I feel it's the same way when one is walking into, for instance, traveling to Palestine or to Iran or taking students into prisons. It's a very humble place. One has to cultivate humility, basically, because we're all on a learning curve. But in order to learn, we have to make ourselves open to people who are fighting to stay alive and to keep their families safe on a daily basis because of the harm, the structures of harm that are around them. How
Thank
could we, people who aren't experiencing that, how can we assume that we have the best answer? We can't. That's actually the level 3 of denial. That's the sort of liberal, we're going to tell you how to build your movement. That I think the best articulation of that is Martin Luther King's letter from a Birmingham jail. And I encourage everybody to read that letter. That is why it's important to center communities communities of struggle and to find your allies within your sector within that. For me, I've been very at home in the arts and in the multi-faith solidarity, because I'm a rabbi, and I that's kind of where I work, and that's who I have. That's where my access is. And I loved developing a community that, where we were on the same page. We really were a transformative force in Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I founded my congregation, and we still are. It's also why I am starting a 2-year program, a Shomeret Shalom ordination program, for starting in this coming February for people who want training in the arts of the Torah of nonviolence. It's a 7-fold path. It's a practice. So we'll learn this and connect so that we can create communities that are comfortable with multi-heritage, multi-faith, and and bring that forward with many, many diversities within the Jewish community, which have so much, which are so wonderful. Yeah.
Thank you so much for this. I'm so excited for the program that you're developing. And I'm wondering if there are particular models for you in transformational solidarity, either ancestrally or from tradition. Um, Curious where you draw inspiration from in that way.
I'm like I'm a sponge. It's like all over. I mean, I've drawn so much inspiration from every struggle I've been part of, ancestor wise. In my newest book, which is called Shomeret Shalom, Replanting Seeds of Jewish Revolutionary Nonviolence, available in Pushcart, Judaica. Um, I've always loved the story of Miriam. I mean, I love those stories because the midwives in the Exodus story, well, I mean, really beginning with Eve, who was pretty rebellious herself and often underplayed as someone who chose wisdom and to share it. And then a patriarchal end of that is she gets punished. But if feminism allows one to flip the script on some of these negative things, but Eve and of course Lilith, the stories of Lilith, these are mythological stories that I usually begin long ago, so long ago it might not have happened, and now, and people who know my storytelling usually yell back, it might not have happened. Miriam the prophet is such a powerful figure because it's clear in that story, in the Exodus story, that she uses the power of dance and communal singing to part the seas. We always think of somehow that Moses parted the sea, but in the oral traditions, Miriam begins singing with her drum, and all the women come because this is a tradition. It's a cultural tradition. It's an ancient tradition. It's an ongoing tradition of women recounting history in chanting, drumming, and dancing, creating a percussive account of history. And it's public and it's domestic, and it can be applied to healing, to public protests, lamentations, to sharing wisdom. The liberation really begins with Miriam singing and the waters parting. And I like to think of that as her singing all the way through. Like everybody, song keeps the waters apart, and keeps the path open. There is a beautiful story that I told in Iran the first time I went to Iran, because I knew I just wanted to really be ready with Iranian stories, with Jewish Iranian stories, just in case somebody was testing my knowledge. That always happens with me. It's always, So this is a story of Serach Bat Asher. There's a beautiful story about her that the rabbis, maybe in Pumbedita, are sitting and arguing about having a very rabbinic argument. How many lanes were parted when the sea parted? Was it a single lane? Maybe it was 3 lanes, one for the Israelites, one for the Levites, one for the Kohanim. Maybe it was 12 lanes. Each tribe had their own lane. And while they're arguing, Serach Bat Asher appears like Elijah. She never died. She kind of transformed into ancestor energy and is always available in, especially in Iran, where there is a gravesite to Serach Badashir. In this story, Serach says, I'll tell you how it was. On one side of the waters, we saw all the generations that came before us. On the other side, reflected in the waters, we saw all the generations that would come. Only by continuing to sing and keep the waters open were those generations able to cross through with us. I told that story on the bima of the Abid Yosef synagogue in Tehran. and much to my incredible surprise, people started clapping. And it was a divided men's section and women's section. There wasn't really a mechitza. And I was definitely not expecting to be on the bima. That was like a last minute thing where Moritz Tzedek said, Rabbi Gottlieb, come and stand on the bima and give a sermon. So I knew that the best thing to do would be to demonstrate my love of Iranian Jewish culture and Iranian Jewish storytelling. And that did indeed open a pathway. But it's such a beautiful story, the connection of the women's traditions, which are so often neglected, for me, have been a continuous inspiration, not only in my own culture, but just seeing so many women on the front lines of these struggles, right? So whether it's Karina Gould, who led the rematriation of the shell mound, my friend Junsan, who is a teacher of the Myohoji Buddhists and kind of carries that lineage and is a close friend. So many, Reverend Deborah Lee, Maram, so many people who are carriers of their culture and tradition in such beautiful ways have always inspired me to be doing the same, to be able to bring that kind of wisdom and knowledge of the things that inspire me in Jewish tradition. And of course, to the rabbis who, the whole peacemaking legacy within the Talmud and within rabbinic tradition seems to have been, become dust in the rubble of the bombs that are being dropped right now. So, like it's said in Central America, you thought you killed us, but we are seeds. We have to keep tending those seeds and creating and cultivating our gardens together.
Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much for this. We have a question from Andy that I would love to share here. Thank you for your guidance and storytelling, Reblin. I'm wondering how you think about your place as a rabbi and cultural worker at the intersection of the Jewish left, which is often overwhelmingly secular, and the spiritual and mystical elements of Jewish practice. How do you see weaving those strands together? Do you see your practice as having magical elements to it, or is it purely work on this plane? What a juicy question.
I mean, storytelling really helps, I mean, just like my granddaughter Lila, who she literally bats her eyelashes. Rabbi, I mean, she says, Savta, will you tell me a story? And then she sits on my lap like I'm a couch, and she just settles back. And sometimes she asks me for specific stories. Sometimes she says, tell me something new. But you can feel, it sounds so California, but you can feel the energy. You can feel the energy shift when one is in the mode of ceremony and story. It is not a theological position. Ceremony is, it's a modality which brings dance and song, story, food together. So it's not like services. Ceremony is not like services. And in my experience, people were, ceremony doesn't ask people to believe in a higher power. It is a way to align oneself with values and with the seasons and with history and with community, and then to create space for stories to be told. Dance is quite a profound methodology, and I always use that to begin ceremony, because you, if one is able, one rises, and there's 3,000 years of tradition of dance, which is hanging by a thread. And I've spent a lot of my life rematriating dance from people who carry it, like my teacher, Everett. I'm sorry, Eric Bendix, who's living in Asheville right now, which, praying for all of the people who've been subject to hurricanes. So it means shifting out of conventional ideas of what constitutes prayer or services, and shifting back into a more ceremonial way of doing things.
I'm so moved by what you're sharing, and there's a resonance that I feel here. I hear so many folks in Jewish community who are working for Palestinian liberation, deeply disillusioned by Jewish spiritual spaces, which aren't speaking for justice, and also yearning for more ceremony in some political spaces. And I feel like you're just dropping treasures of like, here's a way we can do this. It's like, let's be willing to bust out of the formal structure and just make the magics and be the bridge. There's a moment of ceremony that arose for me as you were sharing the story of Serach Bat Asher and the parting of the sea. I'm having a very sweet memory of reading from Torah the story of the parting of the sea with you and Ibrahim Baba, with the
Mm.
Torah unfurled in my backyard some many years ago. And as you shared that story, I'm feeling the bridge across the realms, and I'm wondering if you might share stories of your experience in multi-faith ceremonies that include the sacred and include the liberatory, or how you relate to those strands.
I mean, where shall I begin? It's like something like that happens once a week, but uh, very, very often I'm called on to help build the recipe, and I think the recipe is very helpful. There's a kind of recipe, and we work with that at Interfaith Movement. We developed it together because we don't want to silence anybody's tradition. People should be able to pray in the language that they're praying, as long as there's a kind of universal principle, and yeah, and we're in ongoing conversation. So one element of ceremony is dance, and I'm and like at our last board and staff retreat, which happened a year, this year, we busted out all kinds of dance from different communities, and that's just such a joyous way of creating relationships together. And I always teach the Breugestance because it is a formal dance of reconciliation. So that's an example. And other people have different dances. So in Albuquerque, New Mexico, my community formed a rapid response team in partnership with indigenous people trying to stop another bridge from going across the Rio Grande, because the rock face all along the ridge of the river on the west side is considered to be a, one of the great serpents, and there's petroglyphs all along it. So putting a scar through it is deeply traumatizing, and we already had, a couple bridges. So one afternoon, in order, we were the community, the indigenous communities, shared a social dance in which we're going around, and there's drumming in the center, and there's singing, and we're moving, and we were there for a long time, and there was a lot going on, many speeches, and at a certain point, and I was invited to be part of a sage council uh, much earlier on, of people who are doing this movement building to protect sacred sites, indigenous sacred sites in New Mexico. So one of the elders asked me if my people had any dances. And I'm like, well, as a matter of fact, we do. And so we did the Breguestans. And the whole community was dancing the Breguestans. It was so powerful. It's so incredibly powerful. And so understanding who your partners are, and what people want to bring to the table regarding opening prayer, opening dedications, dedication to ancestors, land acknowledgements, then testimony from directly impacted people, calls to action, storytelling, music, all of these are elements woven together depending on, who's in the room and where you're at. I mean, amazing things, especially if arts are involved, as you well know. One time, I was organizing with a Palestinian friend of mine, and she wanted to bring a multi-faith crew together. She made the most amazing meal for us. There were people from many different backgrounds, many people from Swana, North Africa, Southwest Asia. And after lunch, we're just kind of sitting there, and nobody really knows what to talk about. And I was like, does anybody know? I love Nasruddin Hoja. Does anybody know any Nasruddin or Joha? This is a character that has many names. And immediately, everyone from that part of the world, from North Africa to Iran, we were on the same page. Naturally, they wanted me to tell a story first. So of course I have a few of those stories in my pocket. And then people began to tell stories. People started talking about who told them stories, and the conversation unfolded from there. So in my training and in training others, I feel that one needs to build transformational solidarity. One needs a certain repertoire of something, bring something nice to the table. Might be like, bread is good, food is good, songs are good, stories are good, dance is good, jokes are good. In that kind of environment, I feel sometimes one has to begin with lamentation, depending on where you are. And that is also important to know how to be standing on a massacre site. So, like everything, it has a huge spectrum. And aren't we always in interfaith settings? I mean, is there such a, I mean, there is no such a thing as like something of this kind only, you know, it, we have to, I think, kind of get over that notion and really respect people who are tenders of their culture, who are culture keepers, and how to support them. And they are so important. They play such an important role.
I so appreciate what you're naming here and really hear the invitation to both be in our particular gifts, what we can bring to the conversation, and to be in our humility, to not need to get it perfectly, but to build relationship by just opening the invitation. I'm wondering, Rabbi Lynn, if you'll speak to resilience or to sustainability. A year in to the current genocide, so often I see folks working in solidarity, wrestling with how to keep showing up and also be well enough in themselves and in that dance. And you've been in this work for so long. What wisdom have you found? Or where do you source your strength from to keep going?
Well, I mean, I do a lot of painting. I think there's a couple things. Um, get some good sleep, have your tea in the morning. This is what I call the soul tending part. We, to the degree that we're able, you know, I want to say before I engage that 2 days ago, I posted it on my Facebook page. I was in a really fundraising effort for a family in Gaza. And through some miracle, there was internet, and Yahya was sitting in a tent. It was dark because all the lights were out in Jabalia, and he was holding his phone with a flashlight turned on, and so you could see the light coming, on his face, and it was dark all around him. And he said, all I have right now is my phone and my tent. And everything is terrible. We can't afford food. And there are 9 members of my family. And we're literally having a video chat with someone in the midst of a genocide. And it really made me think about, like, what if this would have happened during the Holocaust? People literally, even though Israel won't let in journalists, people are on their phones with the last bit of juice they have, pleading for help. I say that because that is, to me, a form of resiliency that I don't even know what to call it. It's just so tragic, but you can see people want to live. So I feel however we do our own soul tending so that we can remain sumud, we can remain steadfast, through different cycles, we can keep on keeping on. That's the main thing. So however one does that, running, playing with your grandchildren, painting, meditating, praying, um, walking by the ocean every day, whatever time you give to sustain your life force is also a sacred task. That's a very important thing, because we want to be able to sustain ourselves. And just as Palestinians who are trapped in Gaza with nowhere to go, they want to experience the beauty of life again and live a day without fear. So I feel that that is a situation which must be immediately remedied, even as we try to sustain ourselves in this task, so that we can continue to experience the beauty of life, even as we're experiencing the atrocities. And in that, I'm very inspired by one of the first women rabbis, Regina Yonis, who, her name is not very well known. The first woman rabbi is actually from Kurdistan, Asnat Barzani. Regina was from Poland, served as a rabbi in Berlin. She was ordained by Leo Beck, and she ended up in Theresienstadt, and she wrote sermons there. And by a miracle, a Catholic woman researcher, discovered her papers not that long ago, maybe a decade or two ago. And so we have her sermons. And the sermon that she wrote about what it means to be a Jewish person in the world, it just breaks your heart. And she keeps repeating. At the same time, she's talking about the misogyny of Judaism and trying to justify the fact that women can and should be rabbis, which was her rabbinic thesis. She is speaking to um, the persecuted in her community, and asking them to remember that we're here for a purpose, and that purpose is to live our beautiful lives in the best way we can in the circumstances that we find ourselves. So that's a challenge. And as someone who has a granddaughter who's 3, I feel incredibly lucky to be able to witness on an almost several times a week what innocence looks like, and how precious it is, and how much all of us want to guard that innocence and let that each person grow into the beautiful flower that we each can become with all of our thorns and all of the different things. So resilience is a choice that we can make.
Yes. And as you speak of us all wanting to live this beautiful life, I'm so moved by your sacred art that we are steeped in as we see your backdrop. And I'm so moved by the way that your creativity aligns also with your message. It's like you are making beautiful art that is speaking truth to power. And I'm wondering if you'll speak to that process of the beauty making inseparable from the justice work.
It is a mystery, you know, how we discover our gifts, and sort of where our passions take us. Um, all of this art is really in part the result of a period, I think when I was 65 or so. Now I'm 75. So 64, 63, 64, 65, where I needed a hip replacement and I wasn't really able to perform. I'm a dancer, a very energetic storyteller, but I could barely stand up or barely walk, which is not the case now. But in that period, I decided to tap on another love that I've always had, which is drawing. And so I just gave myself to it. And it's just become part of my life. And especially in wanting to create, this kind of an image and to say something visually and to do culture tending with it, because um, there were 1,000 completely painted synagogues. Like synagogues used, from the ceiling, the floor, the walls, everything inside the sanctuary was art, murals from the very beginning. And that was, the Ashkenazi tradition that I'm part of. All that was lost in the Holocaust. A thousand, all of them were just burned to the ground. There's a few remnants. Um, so I really wanted to, I always had it in my mind to create something like that, and did a little bit with Nahalat Shalom, my congregation in Albuquerque, and now just painting here. I just like to paint. It's so much fun. I Yeah. The justice work, there's no separate. Human beings are creative. And if we want to communicate with each other, beauty is such a good way to communicate. We're much more able to move through denial and fear that can hold us back if we feel more relaxed and open-hearted. And beauty can be that pathway. Creativity can be that pathway.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Lynn, for what you're sharing. And thank you so much for all that you have shared here. Folks who are wanting to tune in more deeply to your work can follow you on the socials. They can sign up for your newsletter. They can read your amazing books. We put a link to the most recent one in the chat. And they can join you in your 2-year Shomeret Shalom ordination program. So many ways. It's a gift to receive your wisdom, and so grateful for all of the work that you're up to in weaving transformational solidarity. As we come to a close,
Igualmente, Thea.
mm, as we come to a close, would you offer a prayer or a blessing or some sacred book end here?
Yes, I was I was going to do that with a prayer from Rabbi Nachman, but I think I moved my book. But let me see. Well,
If you'd like a moment to find the book, Sam also has some announcements.
I think I would like to share words of Rabbi Samuel Tamaris, who was one of the first rabbis to reject militarism within Judaism. He survived World War I. He was profoundly impacted by what he saw. And at first, he was excited by the Zionist movement, the idea of having a Jewish state of one's own. Then he went to a Zionist conference and he came back completely disillusioned, because he realized this was a moment of turning, which he did not approve of. And so he writes, and because it's Sukkot, we call in our ancestors, so that's why I'm calling him in to come and dwell with us. He was also translated by my teacher, Rabbi Everett Gendler, who translated him and made his word accessible to this generation. If this frail and tender people, whose existence has always been secured by ethical force, at last acknowledges the sword, how shall we answer nations who live by the sword? If the people scattered and plucked by the ravages of war, which has felt keenly the pain and suffering, the shame and violence of war, now goes forth in national garb to liberate lands, what can one any longer say to others? I pray that the wisdom of peace spreads throughout the land, and that the courage we need to sustain and end the rule of militarism comes quickly in our day. Free Palestine, free all people.
May it be so. Amen, amen, inshallah. Ken yehi ratzon.
Inshallah.
Inshallah. Thank you so much, Rabbi Lynn. Thank you so much, Teama, and thank you so much everyone for joining us here today and watching later. So grateful for your presence and for your work, Rabbi Lynn, and really appreciate you taking the time to speak with us today. Your wonderful words, your warmth, your care for all beings. We really, really are deeply in gratitude for your presence. And I would be remiss in not offering a call to action for those of us that would like to get involved further. If you follow the link that I posted in the chat, which is sksm.edu/house of dates, at the bottom of the page, we just have 4 links that you can follow for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, Jewish Voice for Peace, Gaza Mutual Aid Support Network, and the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. So if you're looking for a place to just get started, please do start there. Rabbi Lynn, of course, if you have other suggestions, we will be welcome to hear them.
If you're living in the Bay Area and you would like to be part of Interfaith for Ceasefire, you can send me you can just send me a note and I'll connect you. Interfaith for Ceasefire has been growing since last year, and we put out actions. The action that we're demanding right now is calling all your representatives and demanding an immediate ceasefire and an end to arms shipment. Those are 2 actions that we really need to be taking right now.
Thank you so much. Thank you again. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful day. We'll see you soon.